Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahushai, Bashem, Makakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to read through something, in regards to the prophet Jeremiah and some of the things that he went through, and it's showing you how much, that which is then essentially is now, because Jeremiah also had, he had dealt with, our people essentially mocking him. He had dealt with people ridiculing him. He had dealt with a lot of this, a lot of the things that you might see, because, a lot of our people, they use the internet they use it as an opportunity to essentially scoff at the Lord's prophets, to scoff at the Lord's men. They're wearing superhero capes. They're loud. And the scriptures. And even Apostle Paul, he said, I might be rude in speech, but not in knowledge, right? So they're taking in more of the vessel that the Lord chooses, to speak His word, as opposed to what is actually, being said, right? So they stumble at that, right? Because, the Lord chose, rough stones basically to make His altar. And then, when even in the carnal sense, like, when you go into, designing like an actual altar, back in ancient times, the Lord, wanted us, to use, rough stones. He didn't want us to use, like, the scriptures describe them as like hewn stones, like Hewn, if I'm not mistaken. That's how you spell it. And those were the kind of stones that were a little bit more polished. They were more cut properly. They were sanded down. They were properly, shaped, formed, for whatever use, right? So it took away essentially the Most High's credit when the stones were like that. So essentially, the Lord used, in the ancient times, the Lord used the uncut stones, and we are basically like those again, like those uncut stones, that the Lord uses to, make essentially his altars. Like it says, there should be altars in Egypt, to roughly paraphrase, right? So, anyways, not to make a too long-winded message, but like, the Lord, this is just the way He chose, right? And a lot of our people have, essentially a problem with that. They're basically kind of like in that spirit of Miriam, you know what I'm saying? So like Moses' sister, right? So, I kind of wanted to, touch on something that, the prophet Jeremiah, he went through, and, that essentially, which is then is now. And the scriptures say that there is no new thing under the sun, right? Because, you don't really have to go too far. You just go on TikTok, and, there's an elder in South Carolina. He does a lot of these compilation videos in regards to, what they say about the Israelites, what they say, what they, they're and when you listen to them scoff, they don't have any as a matter of fact, let me get this first precept. I didn't have this written down. I kind of just want to flow with this idea, because there's so much, they have so much to say, and they have no understanding. You know what I'm saying? So, oh, 1 second. Oh boy. Let's see. Give me 1 second. For some reason, the Bible app online is not working. Okay, let me just go through it in my apocrypha here. Just give me 1 second. Let me just look for it. This is Sirach 21, verse 15, and it says, "If a skillful man hear a wise word, he will commend it and add unto it. But as soon as one hath no of no understanding heareth it, it displeaseth him, and they cast it behind his back, right? And it says, the talking of a fool is like a burden in the way, but grace shall be found in the lips of the wise, right? So essentially, when our people hear the Lord's word, a mass majority of them, scoff at it, and they cast it behind their back rather than actually trying to examine it and trying to, get understanding, right? And the scriptures say that, with all that get understanding, right? Don't lean upon your own understanding, because our own understanding hasn't led towards any sort of righteousness and led us back to the Lord. And that's really pretty much the point of the Lord sending prophets. Is essentially an example of not only of his compassion, but it's also to for them to actually have a certain set of fervency to return back to him before he brings that judgment, right? We see all these calamities that are occurring upon the planet Earth. We're seeing like a strong distaste for the modern day kings and princes, and essentially there's a lot of spirits creative adventures, like all these different things, all these different plagues that the Lord can use to judge our people. But our people are so comfortable, just like in this time, in Jeremiah's time, they were in Jerusalem, the temple was there. So they, for them, they wouldn't be thinking that, this calamity was going to hit their doorstep. You know what I'm saying? And the Lord used the Babylonians to punish us, right? And then they destroyed the temple and they took us into captivity, right? So, okay, let me go to the story. And I sincerely pray that this lesson is edifying. And I want to read it in an NLT. I'm going to jump back and forth, but just bear with me on this. This is Jeremiah 20, verse 1. And it says here, now Pashur, the son of Emer, the priest in charge of the temple of the Lord, heard what Jeremiah was prophesying. So he arrested Jeremiah the prophet and had him whipped and put in stocks at the Benjamin's gate at the Lord's temple. It says the next day, when Pashur finally released him, it says Jeremiah said, Pashur, the Lord has changed your name. From now on, you be called the man who lives in terror. For this is what the Lord Yahweh says, I will send terror upon you and all your friends, and you will watch as they are slaughtered by the swords of the enemy. And I will hand the people of Judah over to the king of Babylon. So, right, essentially. So at this time, the Babylonians hadn't rolled on, what's it called? Hadn't rolled upon Jerusalem yet. You know what I'm saying? And it says, and he will take them captive into Babylon and run them through with the sword. And I will let your enemies plunder Jerusalem, all the famed treasures of the city, the precious jewels, and the gold and silver of your kings will be carried off into Babylon, right? So the treasures, they had a lot of treasures, within the temple, a lot of different, kinds of vessels of gold and silver and stuff, right? But the vessels also refer to, what's it called? The royal house, right? So you had the upper echelon. They were also known as, vessels as well, right? It wasn't just actual vessels that you might drink from, like, for what I'm saying. So it says here, verse 6, I want to get to the point. I just want to read a little bit of this here. And it says, and as for you, Pashur, you and all of your household will go into captives to Babylon, and there you will die and be buried, and you will all your friends to whom you prophesy that everything would be all right, right? So essentially, this is the message that Jeremiah is giving to, this priest here, Pashur, right? And the priests were responsible for, performing certain sacrificial duties. They lighten incense and so on and so forth, right? But a lot of our people were going off at this time. They had a lot of our people, like, for example, in one chapter it says that our people were burning incense onto vanity, and they were paying attention, and they were baking cakes for the Queen of Heaven, right? It's the same. What that which is then is now, right? So even if it was called like the Queen of Heaven, for example, like back then, like today, you still have a woman worship sort of spirit, upon our people, to this day, right? So even though, we know that the gods of the other nations are idols, we know that. It's the same. Those gods never really disappeared. The names only changed depending, excuse me, depending on the captivity of where our people were basically scattered. So now we're in Babylon the Great, also known as America, which is like it is known as like the mother of all harlots, because she has all these different gods that existed back in the ancient times, right? Nothing has ever really changed. What they require to please those particular gods, has never changed. That's why you see a lot of our people, a lot of information is coming out in regards to the different odious works, you know, that they have to do within, Hollywood or Hollyweird. You know what I'm saying? So, all these different gods never actually disappeared. Everything came back, right? It's the only thing that really changed was basically the captivity and the name of those particular gods, right? So let me get to the mocking portion, right? And I want to go back to hold on, let me go to the KJV for this, because here at the top of the screen it says Jeremiah's complaint. It says, "Oh Lord," this is Jeremiah 20:7, and it says here, it says, "O Lord Yahweh, thou hast deceived me, for I was deceived. Thou art stronger than I, and thou hast prevailed, and I am in derision daily. Everyone mocketh me. For since I spake, I cried out. I cried violence and spoil, because of the word of the Lord was made a reproach unto me, and a derision daily," right? So you see, Jeremiah is kind of voicing, his complaint. You know what I'm saying? And this is the way the people, treated him. They were mocking him, ridiculing. No, it's like the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Because when they see us, they either flip us off, they either throw up, some hand signs or whatever. I remember one time, I think there was a couple weeks ago, at camp, and there were some boys that were walking across the street, and I mean, the other boys could have been Israelites, but they looked kind of more like Edomites. And then the one that was a Jake, he was throwing up, he threw up some kind of sign or something like that, right? And our people don't see that as something not to do. There was more, they kind of just take it as a joke. What I'm saying? They're wearing superhero capes, they're Power Rangers. Let's see, they use it as an opportunity to scoff and mock us, as opposed to actually having, inquire, right? Let's inquire of the house of the Lord. Let's be quiet. Let's hear what they have to say. They don't take, seriously. That's why Hawashai said, a prophet is without honor, within his own kinsman and his household, his own country, right? Because when you go into, how the prophets were seen in the ancient times, like for example, Samuel, when they saw Samuel, they were like, "Yo, comest thou peaceably," right? Because it wasn't like a joke thing. It wasn't like somebody, you would just what's the word I'm looking for? You would just ridicule, you just mock them, make a joke, you make a joke out of them and all this kind of stuff. You wouldn't do that when you saw the Lord's prophets back then. It was more of a serious thing, because they knew and understand, man, when a prophet shows up, man, heavy judgment's going to come upon this place. But in this society, because it's so much comforts, our people don't see the urgency to actually repent. And when you read Isaiah, the 47th chapter, right? There's a mentality that's being conveyed, in regards to, I would not suffer the loss of children nor see widowhood, because in this kingdom, this empire, people don't think of themselves to be in straits, essentially in a position of difficulty, because they have all these comforts constantly surrounding them, going from their social media, in regards to their maybe their 401k, retirement savings plan, their nice house, their fancy BMW, whatever it is that actually helps them to not think about the perils that are occurring upon the planet Earth, as well as what's going on across the seas, right? What's going on in the so-called Middle East and so on and so forth. People don't see the urgency to repent because they don't think they don't think of them in debt. They think that they're whole. And Yahushua said, they that are whole don't need a physician, but they that are sick, right? So they don't see the need to actually, turn back and repent for their wicked behaviors, because they think they're in a good case and they haven't done anything wrong. So, let me continue. As a matter of fact, let me go to Proverbs. Just bear with me. Let me just duplicate this. This is Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, and it says, "Wisdom crieth without, and she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, or in the openings of the gates, and in the city, and she uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and the fools hate knowledge. Turn you at my reproof, behold, I will pour my spirit unto you, and I will make my words unto you." And the Lord uses his prophets to make our people's words, make his words unto our people, right? Because he's basically, telling you to turn back, right? Otherwise, there is a judgment that's prescribed for you, you Israelites. We are the people, we are the people of the book, and essentially, we transgressed. That's the position that we're in, right? And the prophets have the spiritual cure. They have the ability to actually, they have the unction to know all these different things, what's going on the planet, right? And our people don't see that as an opportunity. They basically would rather scoff and use it as an opportunity to they don't want anything to do with the Lord, basically, right? Let me get Second Chronicles. Oh, hold on. I found this juicy this precept. Let me read this. Actually, this is quite interesting. In First Ezra, hold on. Let me get this. Since I was talking about Jeremiah, 1 second. This is First Ezra chapter 1, verse. I'll start at verse 50, and it says here, but nevertheless, the Most High Yahweh of their fathers sent by his messenger to call them back, because he spared them and his tabernacle also. But they had his messengers in derision, and look, when the Lord spake unto them, they made sport of his prophets, right? So okay, let me Google it real quick just for understanding. What does it mean to make sport of something? Does it mean to sport of someone? Okay, so to make sport of someone means to mock, ridicule, make fun of them, often in an unkind and mean-spirited way. It says someone makes sport of another person, they are treating them as a target for amusement or derision. It says it involves laughing at someone. It says often by highlighting their weakness, personal choices, cruelty for entertainment, right? So mockery is done simply for a sake of amusement. So it says teasing, ridiculing, making sport, right? So basically, a good example of that is when you read about Elisha, and then those children, when those children they were mocking him because of this physical, what's it called? I don't want to say deformity, but like his physical like countenance, right? Because he had a bald head, right? And then basically Elisha, he cursed them, and then these she bears came out of the wood and devoured them, basically, right? So and those were children, right? So how much more um like adults, so to speak, right? But the point really is that the Lord is really not a respecter of persons, right? You was mocking the Lord. They took it as an opportunity to mock the Lord's prophets, and it's just like the same thing back then, the same thing is now. We'll just finish this off here, and it says, verse 52 in First Ezra, and it says, "As for forth that he was wroth with his people for the great ungodliness, and commanded the king of the Chaldees to come up against them." So this is basically going into when the Babylonians came and they destroyed the temple. And it says here, "And slew their young men with the sword, yea, even with the compass of the holy temple, and spared neither young man, nor maid, nor old man or child among them, for he delivered all into their hands," right? So the Lord didn't, he didn't care about just because they were a child or because it was a young maid or anything like that. I think in Ezekiel it says, "Slay utterly old and young, maids and little children," right? So, but don't come any man who has essentially the mark, right? That mark of his exemption known as the Thawa, right? And that's something, we hope to, receive, right? Because we understand that we transgressed also, but, we're trying and striving to offend less. And it says here, this is verse 54, and it says, "And they took all the holy vessels of the Lord, both great and small, with the vessels of the ark of the Most High, and in the king's treasures, and carried them away into Babylon. As for the house of the Lord, they burnt it and break it down the walls of Jerusalem and set fire upon the towers," right? So that's basically what happened, when Babylon took over, Jerusalem. We went into captivity. They took our, royal echelon of our people. When you read about those three men, Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael, and even Daniel as well, they were like of the royal house of Judah. And those were also examples of vessels. They were also examples of vessels that were taken in, and they were profitable unto the Babylonian Empire, right? They got taught the language of the Chaldeans and so on and so forth, right? So, but our people essentially went into captivity, because we were going off, right? And the same thing is now, right? But the point in this time, it's that our people will just know death by pain, right? So our people don't see the importance of returning back to the Lord, right? So, that's pretty much the point. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but just to that ridicule, even the prophets back then faced it also, right? So anyways, I just thought I would do this lesson, but Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say shalom.